Mr. Thornton sighed, rolling his eyes as his fingers danced across the keyboard. Find Augustus Vance. Let's see which checking account with a negative balance pops up. He hit enter with a forceful jab, expecting a user not found error or a dormant account with $5 in it. Instead, the screen flickered. A deep, urgent crimson alert washed over his monitor, followed by a series of high-pitched chimes that sounded alarmingly like a security breach. Thornton's condescending smile vanished instantly. He blinked, thinking the system had crashed. He tried to exit the screen, but the terminal was locked. Access level: black. Restricted. Do not proceed without board authorization. Thornton's face lost all color. It was as if he had seen a ghost in the database. His hands began to tremble so violently that he had to pull them away from the desk. He looked from the screen to the little girl in dirty sneakers, and for the first time, he saw something terrifying. This isn't possible," Thornton whispered, his voice cracking. "This file, it hasn't been accessed in 40 years. And if this story of prejudice and sudden twists touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel right now, because what is about to happen in this bank will prove that underestimating the quiet ones can be the biggest mistake of your life." Mr. Thornton tried to hide his shocked expression by quickly tilting the monitor away, but his breathing was shallow and fast. He was sweating now, beads of perspiration forming on his upper lip. Richard Sterling, completely missing the panic in the manager's eyes, tapped his platinum watch face with irritation. "What is the problem, Thornton?" Richard barked, his voice laden with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. "A simple query for a janitor's account shouldn't take this long, unless you're making excuses for this awkward situation because you're too soft to kick her out." Vanessa laughed maliciously, adjusting her pearl necklace as she watched Naya like she was an exhibit in a zoo. "Honey, maybe you better call your granddad. He's probably worried, wondering why you haven't come back with the spare change." "Children have a tendency to get lost in places that aren't meant for them," Richard added, leaning over the counter to glare at the screen he couldn't see. "Come on, Thornton. Print out the zero balance so we can show her the door." Naya remained motionless, but her eyes shifted to Richard. "My granddad isn't worried," Naya said simply, her voice maintaining that disturbing calm. "He died last week, but he told me that some people like you, Mr. Sterling, need to learn lessons the hard way."
The comment about her grandfather's death caused a brief, uncomfortable silence. Richard cleared his throat, clearly annoyed that his bullying had been interrupted by mortality. "Well, I'm sorry for your loss," Richard said, checking his cufflinks without a shred of genuine sincerity. "But that doesn't change the facts. This place is for people who understand serious finance, not for—" he gestured vaguely toward her dirty sneakers, "not for charity cases." It was at that moment that Naya made her move. She opened her transparent folder with deliberate, slow movements. She didn't pull out a dollar bill or a welfare check. She pulled out a heavy, matte black metal card. It had no numbers, no expiration date, and no magnetic strip. Just a single, embossed gold crest in the center, a lion holding a key. Mr. Thornton gasped so loud it sounded like he was choking. He knew that crest. Every banker studied it in history books, but no one had seen a real one in decades. It was the founder's key, a clearance level that technically didn't exist anymore because no one alive held the rank. "What's this?" Richard asked, squinting. He reached out to snatch the card from Naya's hands. "Some kind of commemorative coaster? The souvenir from the gift shop?" Naya pulled her hand back, her reflexes surprisingly sharp. "It's not for you," she replied with a firmness that made Richard recoil as if he had been slapped. It's for the person who actually runs this bank, not the ones who just pretend to." The audacity of her response turned Richard's face a deep shade of crimson. He wasn't used to being challenged by anyone, let alone a child in overalls. "Listen here, you little brat," Richard began, stepping forward aggressively. "Mr. Sterling!" The voice boomed across the lobby, cutting through the tension like a guillotine blade. Everyone turned toward the main entrance. Walking through the glass doors was Miss Victoria Stone, the regional director of North America. She was a woman who didn't just enter rooms, she owned them. Her presence was terrifying enough that even Richard instinctively straightened his tie. "Miss Stone?" Richard stammered, putting on his best fake smile. "Thank goodness you're here. We have a bit of a situation. I was just helping security remove a lost child who—" Miss Stone didn't even look at him. She walked right past Richard, as if he were a potted plant, her eyes fixed solely on Naya. She stopped in front of the counter, her breath hitching in her throat as she looked at the black metal card in the girl's hand. Slowly, the most powerful woman in the banking district lowered herself onto one knee, ruining her impeccable suit trousers on the hard marble floor just to be at eye level with the child. "You have his eyes," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Augustus told me you would come one day. I didn't think it would be this soon." Richard and Vanessa exchanged confused, terrified glances. "Victoria?" Richard asked, his voice high and nervous. "Surely you're not taking this seriously. The girl is clearly playing a prank. That card is probably a prop." Victoria slowly stood up and turned to face Richard. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now burning with a fury that made Richard take a step back. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice icy, "I suggest you be very quiet. You are standing in the presence of the only person in this building who can fire me and bankrupt you."
Richard tried to laugh, but the sound came out like a dry cough. "Bankrupt me? Victoria, with all due respect, you're being dramatic. I'm Sterling Industries. I deposit more in a month than this branch sees in a year. This child she's nobody." That's when Naya spoke again, her voice low but carrying a weight that made the air in the room seem heavier. "Mr. Sterling," Naya asked, tilting her head slightly, "have you heard of Vance Global Holdings?" Richard blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "Of course I have," he scoffed. "Vance Global is the parent company that owns the land this bank is built on. They own half the commercial real estate in the city. They are the primary investors in my company's latest merger." He paused, a look of uncertainty crossing his face. But what does a massive, shadow corporation like that have to do with a little girl in dirty overalls? Naya smiled again, and this time there was something almost predatory about it, an expression that shouldn't exist on the face of a 10-year-old girl. "Everything," she replied simply. "Because Mr. Sterling, the man you just called a janitor, the man you said probably washes your windows, Augustus Vance wasn't just my granddad." Naya stepped forward, placing her hand on the black metal card. "He was the founder, the chairman, and the sole owner of everything the Vance name represents. He built this bank with his bare hands 40 years ago, when people like you wouldn't even let him in the front door." The silence that followed was so absolute that the hum of the air conditioner seemed deafening. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the counter for support. Vanessa dropped her designer handbag on the floor, a $3,000 Birkin bag hitting the dirt, and didn't even notice. Mr. Thornton looked like he was about to faint. He had just tried to kick out the owner of the building. That's impossible," Richard whispered, looking from Victoria to Naya. "Augustus Vance is a myth, a silent partner. No one knows what he looks like." "Because he knew that if people saw a black man in charge, they would treat him differently. So he let you believe what you wanted to believe. He let you underestimate him, just like you did to his granddaughter today." Victoria gestured to the open laptop screen, where the red alert was still flashing. "Naya isn't here to check a savings account, Richard. She is the sole beneficiary of the Vance estate, which means, as of last week," Victoria paused for maximum impact, "she is technically your landlord and your primary creditor." Richard stared at the little girl. The visual error in the room was now the most powerful person in the city. But we were just joking, Vanessa squeaked, her voice trembling. We didn't know who she was. You didn't know who I was, that's true. But you knew I was a child, and you knew I was black. And for you, that was enough reason to treat me like trash. Before Richard could formulate another excuse, the heavy glass doors of the bank slid open again. This time, it wasn't a family member, but a man in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He walked with the precision of a predator. "Sorry for the delay, Miss Stone," the man said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "The traffic on Fifth Avenue was murder, but I managed to print the transcripts on the way over." Richard felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. "Who is this?" "I am Arthur Kane," the lawyer replied, setting his briefcase on the counter next to Nia's plastic folder. "Chief Legal Counsel for the Vance Trust, and I'm here to finalize the documentation regarding your interactions today." Richard let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "Documentation? You just walked in. You didn't hear anything." Nia reached into the front pocket of her overalls. She didn't pull out a toy. She pulled out a sleek, high-end digital voice recorder. The tiny red light was still blinking. "Granddad taught me that people lie. He said that when people think they are powerful, they say things they would never say if they knew the world was listening. So he told me to always hit record before I walked through these doors." She pressed a button. Richard's own voice, clear and undeniably arrogant, echoed through the silent bank lobby. "The child wants to check her balance. She probably thinks this is the candy store down the block, or maybe a homeless shelter." Then Vanessa's voice, shrill and cruel. "Maybe he washes the windows. You know how smudge-prone this glass is?" Richard looked like he was going to be sick. The playback ended, and the silence that followed was suffocating. That's illegal," Richard stammered, his composure crumbling into dust. "You can't record private conversations. That is a violation of my rights." Arthur Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Sterling, you are standing in the public lobby of a commercial bank. There is no legal expectation of privacy here. Furthermore," Arthur opened his briefcase and slammed a stack of papers onto the marble counter. The thud made everyone jump. "We also have the footage from the bank's security cameras, showing you physically intimidating a minor. And frankly, Mr. Sterling, looking at your contract with Vance Global regarding the Sterling merger, you seem to have forgotten a very specific little paragraph." Arthur spun the document around so Richard could read it. He pointed a manicured finger at Clause 14B. "The Morality and Reputation Clause. It states that any partner found engaging in public acts of discrimination, harassment, or conduct that brings shame upon the Vance Global brand represents a material breach of contract." Victoria crossed her arms, staring Richard down. "You just mocked the owner's granddaughter for being black and poor, Richard. I'd say that brings a hell of a lot of shame upon the brand." Vanessa grabbed her husband's arm, her face pale. "Richard, what does that mean? What is a material breach?" Nia answered before the lawyer could. "It means," the little girl said, "that the deal is off."
Richard felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. "The deal is off?" he repeated, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "You can't do that. Sterling Industries has leveraged everything for this merger. If you pull the funding, we won't just stall. We'll collapse." He looked at Nia, sweat now pouring down his forehead, ruining his expensive tan. He dropped to his knees, not out of respect, like Victoria had, but out of sheer desperation. "Nia, honey," Richard pleaded, holding his hands out. "I was stressed. The market has been volatile. I didn't mean those things. I'll make a donation. A huge donation to whatever charity you want. Just tell me the number." Nia looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "You think you can buy your way out of racism, Mr. Sterling. That's the problem. You think money makes you untouchable."
Arthur Kane adjusted his glasses and checked his watch. Actually, regarding money, Miss Stone, could you please refresh Mr. Sterling's account status? Victoria stepped back to the computer. She didn't need to type anything. The system had already updated. It seems, Victoria said, her voice dripping with satisfaction, that per the default terms of your loans, which are held by Vance Global, a breach of contract triggers an immediate call on capital. Richard's phone suddenly buzzed in his pocket. Then it buzzed again and again. It was a rapid-fire staccato of notifications. He fumbled to pull it out. His eyes widened in horror as he read the notifications screaming across the screen. Alert! Line of credit revoked. Bank of America. Alert! Merger financing canceled. Vance Global. Alert! Corporate American Express suspended. "What are you doing?" Richard screamed, staring at the phone as if it were a bomb. "We are calling in your debts, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said calmly, closing his briefcase with a definitive snap. "All of them. Today. Since you obviously don't have the liquidity to pay us back immediately, we have begun the process of seizing your assets to cover the loss." "My assets?" Richard gasped. "The company jet," Arthur listed, ticking them off on his fingers, "the summer home in the Hamptons, and I believe the vintage Porsche you parked in the handicapped spot outside." Vanessa let out a shriek. "The Hamptons house? But that's my house! Richard, do something!" Richard looked at his wife, then at the little girl he had mocked just 10 minutes ago. He realized with a sickening thud that he was no longer a millionaire. He was a man with negative equity and a ruined reputation. "Please," Richard whispered, tears actually forming in his eyes now. "I have a family. I have a reputation. You can't destroy my life over a few mean words." Nia took a step closer. The lobby was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped to listen. "I didn't destroy your life, Mr. Sterling. You did. All I wanted was to see my balance." She looked at Victoria. "Miss Stone, what is the balance of the Vance Estate Trust as of this morning?" Victoria smiled, looking at the screen. "It seems that per the default terms of your loans, which are held by Vance Global, a breach of contract triggers an immediate call on capital."
Vanessa slumped into a chair, sobbing into her hands. Richard remained on his knees, staring at the marble floor, the vibration of his phone buzzing relentlessly against his leg like a dying heartbeat. "Nia, please," Richard whispered, his voice hoarse. "I can change. I can learn. Don't do this to us." Nia watched him with an expression that wasn't angry anymore. It was just disappointed. She adjusted the strap of her denim overalls, looking more like the CEO of the room than the man in the $5,000 suit ever had. "Mr. Sterling," Nia said, her voice clear and echoing off the high ceilings, "you've had 40 years to learn. You've had a lifetime of walking into rooms and thinking you were better than everyone else just because of the suit you wore or the color of your skin." She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city her grandfather had helped build. "My granddad told me that people like you are dangerous, not because you're powerful, but because you're blind. You looked at my sneakers and saw a poor girl. You looked at my skin and saw a servant." She took the black metal card from Victoria's hand and tucked it safely back into her clear plastic folder. "You wanted to teach me my place, didn't you?" Nia asked, tilting her head. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. "Well, mission accomplished," Nia said, a finality in her tone that signaled the end of the conversation. "My place is exactly where Augustus Vance always said it would be, at the top, building a better world for the other kids you try to keep out." Nia turned to Victoria and Arthur. "I'm done here. Please ensure the eviction notice for Sterling Industries is filed by noon." "Considered it done, Miss Vance," Arthur said, bowing his head respectfully. "And cancel his validation for the parking. He can pay the full rate, just like everyone else." Nia walked out of the bank, head held high, with the regional director and the high-powered attorney following in her wake like a royal guard.
The glass doors slid shut with a soft whoosh, leaving Richard and Vanessa alone in the silence of the lobby. Richard sat amidst the wreckage of his life, his phone ringing again. He looked at the screen. It was the board of directors. He didn't answer. He just stared at the empty space where the little girl in the dirty sneakers had stood, finally understanding that the poorest thing in that room had been his own soul. So remember, never judge a book by its cover, and never assume you know someone's worth just by looking at them. Because in this life, the person you look down on today might be the person you have to look up to tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.